Hey guys, this is Mar from the Inside Eight. I'm an advisor with them, and I am here to talk with you about. Actually, I'm here to ask you a question, and that is, are you open to love? And this is kind of a loaded question, or at least it can be. But it's also something that it makes you think a little bit. And I wrote a blog piece about this last week, right around Valentine's Day, just in spirit of having an open heart, openness to relationships, and during a time that kind of makes you think about where you stand in all of these different relationships in your life. So I wanted to kind of talk through just that question in general. So asking yourself, am I open to love, is can mean many things to many different people. So I know for me, I have gone through spurts where am I really open to love? Am I acting in a loving way? Am I able to receive love without fully being confident and self-assured within myself? And how can I recognize love? When is love being actually shown to me? And because there's so many different, and I know there's a book, the Love Languages book, which is a really great book, and it basically explains that there are so many different ways that people show love. And it doesn't take reading the book to kind of have a defined way to recognize it, but it more so just takes yourself being comfortable within your own skin to fully recognize what is happening around you and to you. For some, I know my one favorite example is a client of mine said she loved her boyfriend at one point and everything was great, but he always just wanted to hug at the wrong times. She's like, I'm in the middle of my workday, I'm busy, I'm stressed, but he just walks down and he just wants to give me a giant hug, and it basically makes my skin crawl. And so I asked her, I said, so what is it about that makes your skin crawl, do you think? She goes, well, I'm busy, I'm in the middle of the workday, and I said, but one of the things we've discussed is that you are trying to, have more of a connection with him in certain ways, and this is him actually showing you love. And it may not be the greatest time to you, but can you set aside a couple moments to enjoy a hug? And she was a little dumbfounded and was like, wow, I guess that makes a lot of sense. And so little things like that happen all the time. When people are kind to us, that is an act of love, but sometimes it can rub us the wrong ways if we're just not completely there mentally, spiritually, and so forth. So this can be applied to many things. And the blog post that I spoke to, I have it up here, that I wrote to discuss the most is I asked the question about, what does love and being loving even mean anymore? Because there's a lot of things in today's society with us that what we do is not necessarily loving. So I went through a couple things, just different scenarios that kind of speak to this, and one of which was we often hear this word love thrown around these days. It's a great thing to hear from your friend, from your lover, from your family member, but the word has become a little overused, and not in a mean, awful way that people are overusing it, but when we're not mindful, it's just thrown around in a way that, oh, I love you, like, oh, I love this, or I love that, or, oh my God, I love you so much, and it has, the weight of the word has lost its meaning. So then when you actually do hear it, how do you recognize that it's true? And so that's one thing. In another example, we talk about, or I talked about a relationship that I've had another actual friend of mine who was in a budding relationship, beautiful relationship. It was new. It was like going on 6-7 months. A little bit of a long distance relationship, just between two relatively close cities, so they saw each other quite frequently. But she's a little hung up on just the fact that she hasn't been told that that he loved her yet. However, from a third party perspective, and there is something to be said about hearing that, but from what his actions were showing, which is oftentimes a little more important, what your actions are versus what your words are. They were all showing love, and she was too caught up in waiting for that moment that we all see in movies and those beautiful times where, you know, you get the I love you and it's magical and it's supposed to be perfect, and then you don't get it, and then you start to freak out, and then you lose everything and you just miss out on everything that's happening around you. So being caught up in that is one thing that I often speak to, and try to not be so caught up in hearing words versus seeing those words put to life in actions. So that can mean a lot to other people too. And so, and it isn't our fault, and I wrote this in here, is that it seems that we've become a little bit numb, and it's not necessarily our fault. And that is due to just so much that is going on in our worlds these days. So we are just so we are just in the middle of so much at every single moment of our lives. Whether we are just relaxing on the couch, we might be on our phones, and we're inundated with information on social media. We're inundated with even just text messages. We're just inundated with things and noise, and it has kind of made us a little bit numb to an emotion, and that emotion is love, because it's hard to feel when we're so bombarded and bogged down with stuff and things. And I always talk about the shoulds, you know, I should be doing this, I should have this. We're always thinking about those things versus what we actually want, what we need, and how to be just more happy in ourselves. So I wrote out 4 different possible scenarios to try to weed out all of the stuff, to actually start to feel that true love sensation that a lot of us feel are missing. And the first one is to love yourself, and I talk about this a lot. And it's an ongoing process. You know, it's amazing for the people that, and some people say that they have never struggled with this, but I feel that everyone at some point in their life does, is fully accepting who you are. And that doesn't mean that you accept and you try not to grow as a person, but it's accepting where you are at that given moment, accepting how you were raised, accepting what your job is currently, and then you can build upon that when you're not being bogged down by negative feelings in that nature. So loving yourself also in turn, of course, will attract that person. It's just the law of the universe. The energy you put out is the energy that you get back. And if you don't love yourself, how can you possibly give love or even truly feel love? Because there's a lot of lots of things that can be in the way of actually obtaining that feeling. The second one, which speaks to how I talked about how the word is kind of thrown around, is to be mindful in the choices of your words. And I find myself a lot, at least before, and I've been working on this, is being in conversations where I just kind of use filler words, and they're not even totally things that I feel that are true. So, you know, you're in a conversation and someone is talking about something, and you just kind of join in to kind of be a part of the conversation, but you're saying things that you may not necessarily totally agree with, like, oh yeah, I totally understand, or I totally get that, that's awful, or oh, that's so wonderful, like, oh, that's amazing, and you kind of forget about your actual opinions. So speaking your words of truth and being mindful in those choices can start to bring more weight to your words, and that comes to be the same with speaking the word I love you. You want to say that in a meaningful, true way. So when we throw these things around, we're just contributing to this unnecessary kind of just a widely accepted fact that word is just thrown around. And so maybe we need a new word for love. I'm not sure. But it is something that I think about often. And if we were to at least say it when we really mean it, then we would actually be speaking from our hearts and not just using filler words, and it wouldn't be so confusing for everybody. Recognizing love is what I spoke to earlier. So actually being able to recognize when something is and when someone is being loving. So that example to my client with her boyfriend at the time, where he would just out of the blue give her, giant hugs and want to just be very affectionate at, 1 p.m. in the middle of the workday. They worked from home. And she, instead of recognizing that as an act of love, she recognized it as this kind of really annoying thing that her boyfriend was doing. She didn't understand it. It would cause anxiety, and that's not going to necessarily help the relationship. So recognizing when people are being loving, and people have their own ways of showing that. So if we can be a little more mindful and see the people and the relationships that we have in our life, and that could be family, it could be your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, sister, brother, even in co-worker situations. When people are trying to be kind, can you recognize that love? Because when you recognize it, you can feel it, and you can actually, in return, start to exude a little more loving gestures. And it feels good for you to experience that. And making yourself available is another thing I speak to a lot as well. We're not necessarily available when we're on our phones all the time. We're just not. And as someone who has to be involved in social media for my job, I do try to keep this to almost like a work day. So when I'm working on social media, I try to keep it to a certain amount of time. And I try to be in the world. So when people are dating, for instance, when you're walking around, especially urban cities, are you available to connect with other people when your head's in your phone and you have earphones on? And I had a friend actually do an experiment for me. I asked her, take out your headphones, put your phone in your bag, and when you walk home from work, tell me what happens. And she ended up actually making a connection with someone else. She started striking up conversations with other people, which isn't easy to do because a lot of people are on their phones, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too because I work on the go. But we're missing out on these feelings, and we're just kind of numbing, almost like watching TV, just scrolling through our phones and not fully being in the world. And then we wonder why we're missing out on love and why we're missing out on having these deep connections with other people, because we're not fully available for it. And the availability speaks to all the other points. You can't be fully available for love if you don't love yourself. You can't be fully available for love if your words aren't chosen with care and where you have meaning to what you're saying. And recognizing it, how can you're not able to recognize it if you're not fully there and available to recognize it. We're so busy thinking about other things, and I know we're all busy, but the badge of honor of being too busy is no longer a good thing. I know I talk about this a lot, is just that, exactly that badge of honor. So there is a very big delicate balance between, you have your work and you have your life, and a lot of times they get so intertwined, and it can sometimes become a little confusing for us and people to kind of make those distinctions and try to figure out where to give their time. But a lot of time is not fully dedicated to life. It's still kind of in the work mode. So I love talking about this. When I wrote this blog, Am I Open to Love, I just loved the title of it because it's a good question. Because a lot of times we cannot be open, and it's not like an ongoing it is an ongoing process. It's not just something, am I open or am I closed? Or it's something that you might have to ask yourself every day. Like, are you available? Are you mindful? And that's what it comes down to, is being mindfully aware and there for everyone involved. So I feel that being a little more mindful in every element of our lives can actually very much help our love lives and the love that we can give to friends, family, I love talking about coworkers too, because we take those people for granted, and they are around us all day, every day, and those are the connections. And so a friend of mine always writes these, she's probably the epitome of being open to love. She's another yoga teacher here in Chicago. She doesn't know I'm saying this. I'll have to tell her about it. But she wrote an email today that I read right before I started this here. And it read, "By coming together, we build peace. By practicing together, we build community. And this is how we care for one another." And I fully agree with that. How we can relate to others when we're there for other people, even in a simple way, it is an act of love, and it is caring in either direction. So when we're cared for, we can care for other people. So give the Mindful Life a try and think about these things. Visit the blog, take a look at it, and see if you can recognize anything here or anything there that is relatable to you in your life, and where you can maybe kind of examine how you move about your day-to-day and how you can fine-tune your ability to love and be loved and feel love, and try to move away from the shoulds. So happy to answer any questions, to do follow-up to this, so send us a note. And with that, I will leave you. Happy Friday, and I will see you guys later.